Nestled deep in the Tennessee frontier, back in the early 1800s, lived the Bell family. John Bell, his wife Lucy, and their children had carved out a life for themselves on a sprawling 320-acre farm in Robertson County. They were a respected, hard-working family, pillars of their Red River community. Their days were filled with the familiar rhythms of farm life, tending crops, raising livestock, and attending church on Sundays. Life was simple, predictable, and by all accounts, peaceful. But that peace was about to be shattered in the most unimaginable way. The year was 1817, and an unseen evil was stirring in the woods surrounding their property, an entity that would come to be known as the Bell Witch. The first strange occurrence was subtle, almost dismissible. John Bell was inspecting his cornfield one late afternoon when he spotted a peculiar animal sitting in the middle of a row. He described it as having the body of a dog and the head of a rabbit. It was an unnatural creature, something out of a fever dream. Startled, John raised his rifle and fired. The creature vanished into thin air, as if it were never there at all. Shaken but trying to rationalize what he'd seen, he chalked it up to a trick of the evening light and headed home for dinner. He mentioned the odd encounter to his family, who listened with a mix of curiosity and amusement. It was just a strange story, a weird end to an ordinary day. Or so they thought. That night, the family was jolted from their sleep by a heavy, rhythmic banging on the outside walls of their log cabin. John and his sons grabbed their rifles and rushed outside, expecting to find pranksters or perhaps a wild animal. But the yard was empty. The moon cast long shadows, but there was no one and nothing there. The banging continued night after night, growing louder and more aggressive. It sounded like a giant was beating its fists against their home, trying to get in. Soon, the sounds moved inside. It was a scratching, annoying, as if rats were chewing at their bedposts. They searched every inch of the house, but found no source, no explanation. The family was on edge, sleep-deprived, and increasingly frightened. Then, the unseen entity began to target the children. The youngest daughter, Betsy, started complaining of being slapped by an invisible hand. Her blankets would be violently ripped from her bed in the dead of night, leaving her shivering and terrified. Her hair would be pulled, and she would cry out from sharp, pinching pains all over her body. Her older brother, Drew, reported similar attacks. The family would watch in horror as Betsy's face contorted in pain, red welts appearing on her skin as if from a ghostly whip. These physical assaults were terrifying, but they were just a prelude to something even more sinister. The entity was finding its voice. It started as a faint whisper, barely audible, like the rustling of leaves. The family would hear it in the quiet corners of the house, a soft, wheezing sound. Betsy described it as an old woman, feebly trying to sing hymns. The whispers grew stronger, clearer, until they were no longer whispers at all. They were distinct voices, echoing through the rooms of the cabin. The entity could mimic the voices of family members, causing confusion and fear. It would sing hymns, then devolve into shrieks and maniacal laughter. It quoted scripture word for word from two different sermons preached miles apart on the same day. The disembodied voice was intelligent, and it was malicious. The entity soon gave itself a name, or at least a persona. It claimed to be the spirit of Kate Batts, a former neighbor of the Bells with whom John had a bitter land dispute. Kate, as the spirit became known, harbored a deep and venomous hatred for John Bell. Its spectral voice would fill the house, screaming curses and threats at him. "I am determined to haunt and torment old John Bell as long as he lives," it would shriek. The voice promised to bring him nothing but misery and suffering. It tormented him relentlessly, its voice following him from room to room, mocking him, insulting him, and never allowing him a moment of peace. John Bell, a proud and stoic man, began to deteriorate under the constant psychological and physical torment. The entity would cause him strange physical afflictions. His face and mouth would become contorted. His tongue would feel swollen, and he would have trouble swallowing. It was as if an invisible force was choking him from the inside. He grew frail and weak, a shadow of his former self. The entire family was living in a state of perpetual terror, held captive in their own home by a malevolent, unseen force that seemed to feed on their fear. The once peaceful Bell Farm had become a living nightmare, a battleground between the living and a vengeful spirit. News of the haunting spread like wildfire throughout the region. People came from all over to witness the strange phenomena at the Bell Farm. Some were skeptics, others were believers, but nearly all left convinced that something supernatural was at play. Visitors would have their hats snatched from their heads. They would be slapped, pinched, and their shoes would be thrown into the fire by an unseen force. The spirit, Kate, seemed to relish the audience, often engaging in long, intelligent conversations with visitors, answering their questions and displaying a chilling knowledge of their personal lives and family histories. She would reveal secrets that no one outside their families could possibly know. One of the most famous visitors was Andrew Jackson, a future president of the United States. A seasoned general who feared no man, Jackson heard the stories and decided to investigate for himself. He arrived at the Bell property with a contingent of men, including a self-proclaimed witch-tamer who bragged he could dispatch any spirit. As their wagon approached the farm, it suddenly stopped dead. The horses strained, but the wagon wouldn't budge, as if held by an immense, imbeseemly force. Jackson famously exclaimed, "By the Eternal, boys, it's the witch." After much struggle, the wagon finally moved, and they proceeded to the house. That night, the witch Tamar was brutally attacked by the entity, and he and Jackson's men fled in terror before dawn, vowing never to return. The haunting of the Bell family had proven too powerful, even for the formidable Andrew Jackson. The torment continued for years, centered primarily on John and Betsy. Kate, the spirit, seemed to have a strange, conflicted relationship with the family. While she tortured John and Betsy, she showed a peculiar kindness towards Lucy, John's wife, often leaving her fresh fruit and singing her sweet songs. But her primary mission was clear: the destruction of John Bell. As John's health failed, the spirit's attacks intensified. In December of 1820, after years of suffering, John Bell finally passed away. The family found a strange vial of liquid in the medicine cabinet after his death. The spirit's voice shrieked with glee, "I gave old Jack a big dose of that last night, and that did him." To test it, they gave a drop to the family cat, which died instantly. John Bell's death was officially attributed to the witch. At his funeral, the entity celebrated loudly, singing bawdy drinking songs until the last mourner had left. The curse had claimed its first victim, but the story was far from over. This was only the beginning of a legend that would terrify a nation for centuries to come. What happened next to Betsy and the rest of the Bell family is a tale for another time. Last time, we explored the unsettling beginnings of the disturbances plaguing the Bell family. But what started as strange noises and unsettling apparitions was about to evolve into something far more terrifying. This is the story of how the spirit found its voice, and with it, a new power to terrorize. For nearly a year, the Bells endured the escalating paranormal activity in silence, their fear mixed with a deep sense of shame and confusion. What was happening to them? Was it a curse? A demonic presence? They were a respected, church-going family in Adams, Tennessee. These were things that happened in stories, not in their quiet, rural lives. But the relentless torment became too much to bear. John Bell Sr., the patriarch of the family, finally broke his silence and confided in his closest friend and neighbor, James Johnston. Johnston, a practical and skeptical man, listened intently as John recounted the terrifying events. He didn't immediately dismiss the story. Instead, he proposed an experiment. He and his wife would spend the night at the Bell home to witness these strange occurrences for themselves. As night fell, a heavy silence settled over the house. The Johnstons and the Bells waited, a palpable tension in the air. For hours, nothing happened. Perhaps, Johnston thought, it was all just a product of stress and overactive imaginations. But just as he was about to relax, it began. The familiar sounds echoed through the house, the knocking on the walls, the scratching at the door, the sound of a dogfight raging just outside. Then, the invisible force turned its attention to the beds. The covers were ripped from the Johnstons, thrown across the room with violent force. James Johnston, a man not easily frightened, found himself face to face with a reality he couldn't explain. He reportedly sat up in bed and exclaimed, "In the name of the Lord, who are you, and what do you want?" For the first time, a reply came. It was a faint, whistling sound, barely a whisper, but it was a response. The entity had acknowledged his question. The haunting had crossed a new threshold. The spirit was no longer just a silent tormentor. It was attempting to communicate. News of the Johnstons' experience spread like wildfire through the community. The Bell House was no longer a private place of suffering. It became a local curiosity, a place of morbid fascination. People from all over Robertson County flocked to the farm, hoping to witness the Bells' wonder. The spirit, it seemed, reveled in the attention. Its presence grew stronger, its voice clearer with each passing day. Initially, the voice was weak, a series of whistling sounds that slowly formed into words. It sounded like an old woman, her voice raspy and faint. The family and their visitors would ask it questions, and the spirit, which they began to call Kate after it claimed to be the witch Kate Batts, would answer. Its knowledge was astounding and deeply unsettling. It could quote scripture from 2 different sermons preached on the same day, miles apart. It knew the private conversations and secret thoughts of people in the community, often revealing embarrassing details to the shock and amusement of those gathered. But this was no friendly spirit. While it could be playful and witty, its primary nature was malicious, and its favored targets were John Bell Sr. and his youngest daughter, Betsy. The spirit directed a special kind of cruelty towards John, whom it called old Jack Bell. It would curse him, slap him, and pull his hair. It tormented him with prophecies of his own demise, promising it would be the end of him. During his meals, it would pull food from his mouth, and when he tried to sleep, it would scream in his ears, ensuring he found no rest. His health began to fail under the constant physical and psychological assault. Betsy Bell, a bright and popular young girl, suffered a similar fate. The spirit, or Kate, seemed to harbor a deep-seated hatred for her. It would pinch her, slap her until her face was red and swollen, and pull her hair so violently that she would scream in pain. Pins would mysteriously appear and stick her. She would faint without warning, only to be revived and tormented again. Why this intense focus on Betsy? The spirit offered one primary reason: Betsy's engagement to a local young man named Joshua Gardner. Kate was vehemently opposed to the match. Whenever Joshua visited, the spirit's attacks on Betsy would intensify. It would scream at them, mock their courtship, and threaten them with eternal damnation if they were to marry. The entity declared, "You will not marry Joshua Gardner." The pressure was immense. Not only was Betsy enduring horrific physical abuse, but her relationship was being systematically destroyed by an invisible, malevolent force. The constant torment, the public spectacle, and the spirit's relentless campaign against her happiness took their toll. Eventually, broken and exhausted, Betsy Bell broke off her engagement to Joshua Gardner in 1821. On that day, the spirit reportedly laughed in triumph. The voice of the witch was now a constant presence in the Bell home, a member of the family born of hate and malice. It held conversations, sang hymns, argued theology, and dispensed brutal, personal attacks. Its power seemed limitless, its cruelty boundless. The Bell family was trapped in a living nightmare, held captive by a spirit that could speak, that could fight, and that seemed determined to tear their lives apart, piece by piece. The story of the Bell, which was now attracting attention far beyond the small community of Adams. One of the most famous figures, too, allegedly, encountered the spirit was none other than General Andrew Jackson, a war hero and future president of the United States. Intrigued by the fantastic tales, Jackson gathered a group of men, including a self-proclaimed witch Tema, and set out for the Bell farm to investigate. As their wagon approached the property, it suddenly stopped dead. The horses strained, but the wagon wouldn't budge, as if held by an unbreakable, invisible chain. Jackson, a man known for his fiery temper, reportedly shouted, "By the eternal, boys, it's the witch." Just then, a sharp, metallic voice cried out from the roadside, "All right, General, let the wagon move. I'll see you again tonight." Instantly, the wagon rolled forward as if nothing had happened. That night, Jackson and his men settled in at the Bell home. The witch, Tamar, confident in his abilities, pulled out a pistol loaded with a silver bullet and boasted he would put an end to this spirit. No sooner had he spoken than he yelped in pain, claiming he was being stuck with pins and beaten by an unseen force. He flew out of the house and didn't stop running. The spirit then turned its attention to Jackson and his men, pulling off their covers and assaulting them throughout the night. By morning, a humbled Andrew Jackson had had enough. He and his men packed up and left, with Jackson famously stating, "I would rather fight the entire British army than to deal with a Bell Witch." The voice of the witch had terrorized a family, broken an engagement, and even sent a future president packing. John Bell's health continued to decline rapidly, just as the spirit had promised. It showed him no mercy, tormenting him even on his deathbed. In December 1820, John Bell fell into a stupor and could not be roused. The family found a strange vial of dark liquid in the medicine cabinet. When they asked the spirit what it was, it proudly proclaimed that it had given old Jack a big dose of that last night, and that will fix him. They tested the liquid on the family cat, and it died almost instantly. John Bell Sr. passed away on December 20th, 1820. During his funeral, the spirit was heard singing loudly and joyfully, celebrating the death it claimed to have caused. After John's death, the spirit's activity began to wane, but it wasn't finished. It promised it would return in 7 years, and in 1828, it did, focusing its attention on John Bell Jr. It shared prophecies and discussed the future before departing again, this time promising to return in 107 years. To this day, some claim that strange activity still occurs on the land where the Bell family once lived, a chilling echo of the voice that once held a family and a nation captive. The Bell Witch haunting remains one of the most compelling and terrifying cases in American folklore. A spirit that spoke, that argued, that fought, and that ultimately claimed a life. In a quiet corner of Tennessee, back in the early 1800s, a family's American dream curdled into a nightmare. This isn't just another ghost story told around a campfire. This is the story of the Bell Witch, a haunting so intense, so violent, it became the only case in American history officially recognized where a spirit caused a person's death. It all began on the farm of John Bell, a respected elder and family man. It started subtly, strange animal sightings, whispers in the fields. But soon, the whispers followed the family inside their home. A disembodied voice, at first faint, then growing stronger, louder, and more malicious. It knew their secrets, their fears. It tormented them relentlessly. The youngest daughter, Betsy, bore the brunt of the physical attacks. She was slapped, pinched, and had her hair pulled by an unseen force, leaving welts and bruises. The family was living in a state of constant terror. The entity identified itself as Kate Batts, a former neighbor of the Bells, who believed John had cheated her in a land deal. On her deathbed, she had supposedly sworn to haunt him and his descendants forever. This spirit, now known as the Bell Witch, held a particular grudge against John Bell himself. Sikayedem old Jack and promised, with chilling certainty, that she would be the end of him. John Bell's health began to decline rapidly. He suffered from strange fits. His tongue would swell, and he had difficulty swallowing. Doctors were baffled. His condition worsened day by day, and the witch's taunts grew more gleeful. She would sing and laugh while he writhed in agony, celebrating his suffering. The family tried everything. They held prayer meetings, brought in investigators. Even future President Andrew Jackson allegedly visited the farm, only to have his men flee in terror from the witch's power. Nothing worked. The entity was too strong, too determined. One morning in December 1820, John Bell couldn't be roused from his bed. He had fallen into a stupor. Near his bedside, the family found a strange vial containing a dark liquid. The witch's voice boomed through the house, proudly proclaiming that she had given old Jack a dose of it during the night and that it would finish him. To test the substance, they gave a drop to the family cat, which died almost instantly. The liquid was a potent, unknown poison. John Bell never woke up. He died on December 20th, 1820. The family's tragedy was complete, but the witch's horror wasn't over. During the funeral, as mourners gathered, the entity began to sing boisterously, celebrating its victory. Her chilling, joyous songs filled the air as they lowered John Bell's body into the ground, a final act of desecration. After John Bell's death, the witch's activity lessened. She tormented Betsy for a while longer, forcing her to break off her engagement, before finally announcing she would leave, but promised to return in 7 years. True to her word, she returned, but her visit was brief. She then promised another return in 107 years, which would have been 1935. Many residents of Adams, Tennessee, the town where the Bell Farm once stood, reported strange occurrences that year. The story of the Bell Witch and the death of John Bell isn't just a local legend. It's a cornerstone of American folklore, a documented account of a haunting so powerful it defied explanation and ended in death. The Bell Witch Cave, located on the former Bell property, is still a site of paranormal investigation, where visitors report whispers, strange lights, and an overwhelming sense of dread. The question remains, was it the vengeful spirit of Kate Batts, or some other, darker force? Whatever it was, it left a permanent scar on American history, a chilling reminder that some ghost stories are all too real. Have you ever heard a story so chilling, so persistent, that it seems to have a life of its own? A story that sinks its roots deep into the soil of history and refuses to let go. Today, we're journeying into one such legend, the enduring mystery of the Bell Witch. This isn't just a campfire tale. It's a piece of American history that has puzzled researchers, terrified locals, and inspired countless works of horror for over 200 years. From the violent aftermath that tore a family apart to the strange, modern-day echoes of a spirit that refuses to rest, we're going to peel back the layers of this fascinating and frightening case. What really happened in that small Tennessee cabin? Was it a hoax, a family tragedy, or something far more sinister? Let's uncover the truth behind the legend that simply wouldn't die. Our story begins in 1817, in a quiet farming community in Robertson County, Tennessee. The Bell family, led by patriarch John Bell, were respected and prosperous settlers, but their peaceful life was about to be shattered by an unseen force. It started subtly, strange noises in the woods, the sound of an animal being choked. Then, it moved inside, knocking on the walls, the sound of chains being dragged across the floorboards, and the chilling sensation of bedsheets being pulled off in the dead of night. At the epicenter of this activity was the family's youngest daughter, Betsy Bell. The entity, which soon began to speak in a raspy, disembodied voice, identified itself as Kate Batts, a former neighbor with whom John Bell had a financial dispute. This spirit, who had become known as the Bell Witch, was not friendly. He tormented the family relentlessly, physically assaulting them, pinching, slapping, and pulling their hair. The torment wasn't just physical, it was psychological. The entities seemed to know everyone's secrets. It would interrupt conversations with eerie accuracy, revealing private thoughts and past deeds. Visitors came from miles around to witness the phenomenon. Even Andrew Jackson, who would later become the President of the United States, reportedly made a trip to the Bell Farm. According to legend, his entourage was so terrified by the witch's power that they fled in the middle of the night, with Jackson himself declaring, "I'd rather fight the entire British Army than deal with the Bell Witch." The entity's hatred was most fiercely directed at John Bell. It cursed him, tormented him, and vowed to see him dead. And in 1820, its promise came true. John Bell fell gravely ill, suffering from seizures and difficulty swallowing. The spirit's voice cackled with glee, boasting that it was poisoning him. After his death, a strange vial of liquid was found in the medicine cabinet. When a drop was tested on the family cat, the animal died instantly. The bell, which had claimed its victim. After John Bell's death, the entity's presence began to fade, but it promised to return. This is where the story shifts from a historical account to a living legend. The aftermath for the Bell family was devastating. The farm was eventually sold, and the family scattered, forever marked by the trauma they had endured. But did the witch truly leave? The land itself seemed cursed. For generations, people living near the old Bell property have reported strange occurrences. Disembodied voices, unexplained lights, and shadowy figures are common tales in Adams, Tennessee. The story was passed down through oral tradition for decades before being written down, most famously in MBE, Ingram's 1894 book, An Authenticated History of the Famous Bell Witch. This book compiled eyewitness accounts and family testimonies, cementing the legend in the annals of American folklore. But is there any real evidence beyond these stories? Let's examine the historical breadcrumbs. The existence of the Bell family, John Bell's death, and the widespread local belief in the haunting are all documented facts. We have census records, property deeds, and church documents that place the family in that specific time and location. The account of Andrew Jackson's visit is harder to verify. While it's a popular part of the legend, there's no definitive proof in his personal papers that the visit occurred. Skeptics suggest the story was embellished over time to add credibility. Many theories attempt to explain the phenomenon. One popular explanation is that it was an elaborate hoax, perhaps orchestrated by Richard Powell, a school teacher who was in love with Betsy Bell. The theory goes that he used ventriloquism and trickery to scare off a rival suitor. Another theory points to John Bell himself, suggesting he suffered from a neurological disorder that caused the physical symptoms and perhaps hallucinations. The family, caught in a cycle of fear and religious fervor, may have interpreted these events through a supernatural lens. But these rational explanations don't quite satisfy everyone. How could a hoax be so elaborate and sustained for years? How could it fool so many witnesses? This brings us to the modern sightings. The most famous site associated with the legend is the Bell Witch Cave, a limestone cavern on property once owned by the Bell family. The witch allegedly took refuge here, and to this day, it's a hotspot for paranormal investigators and curious tourists. Visitors report all kinds of strange phenomena: cold spots, equipment malfunctions, disembodied whispers, and even physical sensations, like being touched or pushed. Some people claim to have captured EVPs, or electronic voice phenomena, containing raspy voices that eerily match the descriptions of the witch. One of the most common reports is of a little girl's laughter echoing from deep within the cave, a detail that chills even the most hardened investigators. Are these experiences simply the power of suggestion in a creepy place, or is something truly there? The mystery only deepens when you consider the cultural impact. The Bell Witch case is arguably the foundation for many modern paranormal concepts. It's one of the earliest and most well-documented cases in American history where a spirit is reported to have spoken, interacted physically with the living, and ultimately caused a person's death. This story has directly inspired some of the most iconic horror films, like The Blair Witch Project and The Exorcist, which both feature an unseen, tormenting entity and a focus on a young female victim. The narrative of a haunted family, a malevolent spirit, and a curse that endures has become a staple of the horror genre. And it all traces back to that Tennessee farm. The legend of the Bell Witch isn't just a ghost story. It's a cornerstone of American folklore that continues to shape our understanding of the supernatural. So, what are we left with today? We have a historical event shrouded in mystery, a family torn apart by an invisible force, and a piece of land that seems to hold on to that dark energy. We have decades of eyewitness accounts, from the 19th century all the way to last week's tourists at the Bell Witch Cave. We have logical theories that attempt to ground the story in reality, and we have paranormal evidence that pulls us right back into the supernatural. The Bell Witch legend endures because it touches on our deepest fears. The fear of the unknown, the fear of losing control, and the idea that some forces are beyond our comprehension. Whether Kate Batts was a vengeful spirit, a clever hoax, or a manifestation of psychological turmoil, her story has become immortal. It's a chilling reminder that some echoes from the past never fade away. They just wait for new ears to listen. The mystery of the Bell Witch is a puzzle with no easy solution, and perhaps that's why it continues to captivate and terrify us more than 200 years later. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into one of America's most chilling legends.